Miyako, and we have 3 papers to hear in this session. As Miyako said, all of them in different ways related to how you can use PISA to evaluate other policies or practices. So we'll start with hearing a presentation from the 2 colleagues here to the left, Isa Steinmann and Maria Simeonaki. And you can introduce your projects on your own.
Okay, thank you. The slides. Okay. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, so it works. Yeah. What did you okay. Hello. This study is a collaboration or is done under the framework of Horizon 2020 project called STRIDE, Strategies for Achieving Equity and Inclusion in Education, Training and Learning in Democratic Europe. It is funded by the European Commission and it is coordinated by Oslo University, Metropolitan University in Norway. This is joint work together with Isa Steinmann, Martin Megesi and Li Hong Huang, who is also the coordinator of the program, and myself. And our specific research question is whether an increase in preschool enrollment can lead to a decrease in educational inequalities. And I would like to start by linking this research project with the use of PISA data to inform educational policy in my home country, which is Greece, and more specifically, how the Greek Ministry of Education interpreted the poor performance of Greek students in the PISA 2018 survey, where the scores dropped even more and continue to be under the OECD average, as a sign or as a strong indication of the need to prioritize mandatory preschool enrollment. And as a result, a preschool, a policy mandating preschool enrollment for 2 years at the age of 4 was introduced, and by the school year of 2021, this compulsory preschool 2-year kindergarten attendment was implemented nationwide by law. Now, well, it takes some time, sorry. Can I use the keyboard, maybe? Okay. So during the last decade, there are many EU countries implementing policies aiming at the expansion of preschool enrollment. And as a result, there is an increase in the number of children attending preschool education, especially for children that come from disadvantaged groups. And also there is an increase in the time spent in preschool education because for instance, there are many preschool services in the EU countries for children that are under the age of 3. And yeah, next slide. Thank you. These expansions had primarily 2 aims. The first one was to improve the work-life balance by helping families reconcile their career and their caregiving responsibilities, but also to improve preschool skills, especially for children that are at the risk of performing low or having a low academic performance. So these policies aim to decrease educational inequalities, mainly or also for children before they enter the formal education. So next slide. Using the UNESCO data, we see here in this slide the gross enrollment ratio for the EU countries, but also for the UK and Norway, which is the focus of this project because it is a European project. And just to note here that this gross enrollment ratio can exceed 100% in the case where underage or overage preschool children are included. And next slide, just to see that we have two trends here. In these graphs, we have countries where we do have an increase or a steady increase in preschool enrollment, but also we have countries with long-steady high rates that they maintain these high enrollment ratios during the years of our study. And just a quick note also, we can see here the effect or the impact of this policy that I mentioned earlier in Greece, because we have an increase in preschool enrollment in Greece, reaching almost 100% in the year 2020. And I will give the floor to Isa to show us the results of the work.
Yes, so I will also try my luck with this thing. Okay, next slide, please. So again, our research question is, does preschool expansion reduce educational inequalities? And naturally, this is a country level research question. So we don't ask, would this child... Okay, it wasn't turned on. Okay. So we did not ask, would this child profit from attending preschool, for example? But we look at expansion policies and increasing rates at the country level. What do we mean by educational inequalities? We look at the mean test score differences between students with a high versus low socioeconomic status. And then, I mean, there was a lot of talk about causal inferences at this conference already. Obviously, for a causal research question like this, it would be ideal to have experimental data where we would tell a random set of countries to increase their rates, another random set of countries to decrease their preschool enrollment, and others to stay stable over 20 years. And that's obviously not possible. So we have to use observational data. And what we do is we conduct longitudinal country fixed effects regression analysis. I will explain this a little bit more later. So here you see our outcome in the different countries that we investigate. So we see for the PISA cycles 2003 till 22, the mean reading performance scores for kids with a high SES and a low SES. And specifically, we look at the extremes. So we look at the top 10% ESCS kids and the bottom 10% ESCS kids per country by year observation. And it is not surprising to anybody in this room that the high SES students outperform the low SES ones in reading across countries and time. But we do see some gaps, some variation in these gaps over time within countries, right? So here we illustrate this, for example, for the UK, where the gaps decreased over a period of time a little bit. But this is a little bit difficult to read. So this graph shows, instead of the mean scores, the inequality scores on the y-axis. Yeah, so this illustrates the gaps and how they vary across countries a little bit better. And we see very similar patterns in mathematics as well. And so in our study, we, as I said, we run country fixed effects regression of these test score gaps on earlier preschool enrollment rates. Earlier means a 10-year time lag, right? So the 5-year-olds that are enrolled in preschool, they are 10 years later, 15-year-olds in PISA. And this allows us to compare countries with themselves, right? So we don't look at between country differences, but we look at within country trends over time. So this means that we account for any time-stable predictors of socioeconomic inequalities and achievement. So this means, for example, countries' general economic prerequisites or general political differences. And furthermore, we try to control for other things that might have changed over time within these countries. Specifically, we look at major demographic or economic changes and major or fluctuations in the quality of the PISA data. So we look at GDP, the percent at risk of relative poverty, the total number of children, the net migration rate, and the PISA coverage index 3, which gives us an idea about how representative the PISA samples really are for all the 15-year-olds in a country. And so we regress these test score gaps on preschool enrollment. In this first model, we don't include any country fixed effects and no control variables. So this is a cross-sectional model, and everybody knows correlation is not causation. But we observe that in countries and country-by-year observations with higher enrollment rates, we observe higher socioeconomic inequalities. So this would be extremely discouraging, right, if this was the actual causal effect. But when we include country fixed effects, so once we compare countries with themselves, we see that countries that increase their enrollment rates actually have decreasing socioeconomic inequalities in mathematics test scores. But when we furthermore include our control variables, this effect is not longer significantly different from zero. And in reading, it was not significantly different from zero to begin with. So to sum up, cross-sectionally, we observe more inequalities in countries that had higher preschool enrollment rates 10 years before. But this can go back to all sorts of differences between those countries and shouldn't be interpreted in a causal way at all. And once we estimate country fixed effects, we see a small negative effect. So that is what we would like to see. So that increasing enrollment leads to a decrease in socioeconomic inequalities 10 years later. We see that in mathematics, but not reading, and it disappears once we control for other major changes. So unfortunately, we find no robust evidence for increasing preschool enrollment rates leading to decreasing educational inequalities. And of course, we ask ourselves, why could this be, right? Why is this not significant? So I think one thing is that the statistical power is quite low at the country level, right? PISA has these amazing samples within countries. Number of students are really high and nice, and I really like this data. But then at the country level, for these kind of analysis, we included maximum 7 measurement points, right? So we always look forward to having more PISA cycles and the same countries participating again and again. And we look to include 2000 as well, but that didn't have the ESCS index reported in the international database, so we would have to compute it ourselves and so on. And this is work in progress, so we are currently still working on this. Also, this gross enrollment ratio is an imperfect measure, right? Because it can decrease when more kids, when a country says that that preschool means from 4 years onwards, and then they say from 3 years onwards, then the rate goes down for the moment, right? Or if kids who should already be in primary school, they are still in kindergarten, then it's above 100%. So it's not a super nice measure, I would say. We're looking into alternatives for that one too. And also, what is the true effect of expanding preschool on reducing educational inequalities between high and low SES kids at the age 15, you know? Could this be too small per se to be detected in a country level study like this? So how large is the effect of increasing enrollment rates on the enrollment of low SES kids? The hope would be that when we increase rates, we get the low SES who need preschool most. Basically, we didn't catch them before, but is this the case? This is something that we're also currently looking at. And so how large is the effect of attending versus not attending preschool on reading and mathematics test scores at the age 15? So many things happen in between also, right, in the school career that are also having strong effects on these test scores. So there we are also looking at Pearl's and Tim's grade 4 data, which is a little bit closer to kindergarten, right? So yeah. So these are not super encouraging results so far, but again, it's a work in progress. And I think it's an example for both why countries should participate in PISA, what kind of analysis are increasingly possible with this kind of data at the country level. Yeah, and how we can at least try to apply causal inference methods also to this kind of data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and an impressive project and impressive time management skills as well. So that's also encouraging. I think now we'll have a presentation from Sarah Wang on mathematics education and how to do it well, I think.
I'm going to stand up so I can see everyone. First, thank you to the organizers for these wonderful opportunities. Thanks for everyone to join the session here. So as some of you may know, so my name is Sarah and I'm from Australia. And it took me 32 hours to get here. So I'm sure it's worthwhile. Now, today I'm going to actually talk about many roads lead to Rome, pathways to high national math performance. On the way here, I was thinking that since we are gathering in Dubrovnik, I should change our destination from Rome to Dubrovnik, right? So, oh, it's not on. Second. Oh, yeah. No. Okay. So Dubrovnik, well, this is Dubrovnik, and I didn't take the photo. So Dubrovnik in my research project is high national math performance. So these roads, boats, or ships are the pathways to get here. Now, they are the factors that we considered before we get here. So my research project is to find out what or which combinations of factors explain high national math performance. So I would like to emphasize here, in this project, I'm particularly interested in national math performance. So the math performance at the national level, not at the students or the school levels. So just like all of us getting here, before we made a decision, we had to consider different factors, like how much time do you have for the trip? What's the budget? How much it does cost? The transport availability, etc. Right? So, and we get here and we share our knowledges and we learn from each other. So I believe my research also tries to share the lights to the policymakers in the different countries to learn from each other. So let me take a step back to explain some context of this research. Now, I mentioned this concept about learn from others. I'm aware there are some different opinions and thoughts towards this idea. Okay, somebody will argue, is it really possible for one country to learn from another country to improve your own education quality? Now, for me, I tend to assume and believe learning from others is possible. Just like us, staying here, gathering, and I have learned so much from many of you, okay? And I also believe that learning from others can be beneficial as long as we find the appropriate ways, okay? Now, here I would like to compose several questions for you to consider. When you think about improving your country's performance, in math or in other areas, will you compare your students' performance or the school performance to the counterparts in the targeting countries? Or will you consider the national average and find out which country are higher performing? Now, if you look at the national average, how do you choose which country to compare? Any country on the top of the list? So let's bear this big question in mind, and there are some aspects related to the math education. So first, there are many factors that could potentially explain math performance. So my colleagues and I did a systematic review a couple of years ago, and we found out there are 135 factors that have been investigated so far. I know. I know that paper was actually cited quite well. So now, second part is that factors actually interact. So what do I mean by that is when we were deciding how to get here, we looked at the time we have, we looked at the money we have, the budget we have, we looked at the cost of the trip, we looked at if the flight is available, the train or the bus or whatever. And we considered them all together. We didn't consider them separately. And that's what I mean by we actually consider them combined effect. Okay, similarly, for example, significant interactions exist among student self-efficacy, the school socioeconomic compositions, and the students' exposure to math content. Okay, so the number 3 is that the country context varies. Now, I believe that you remember from the yesterday's conference that our Finnish colleagues mentioned that very, very well. If you want to take my system, if you want our results, take our society with you, right? And I want to build on that. I want to emphasize that the interactions among factors also vary depending on the country context. So let me give you another metaphor. So these pots are the countries, okay? The math performance is the stew or the soup that we would like to cook in these pots. And the ingredients are the factors. So when we put the ingredients in the pot, they don't just sit there by themselves. They interact. And then the pot itself is a country, and it determines how the stew turns out. The pots conduct heat differently. So the stew is cooked slower or faster depending on the local condition. So my research considered all of this, and so the outcome of interest of my research is the country average. So I used the mean score, and I systematically compared 49 countries. Now, I didn't exclude other countries for particular reason. It's just because I couldn't find all the data for these countries. And the research method that I used is called qualitative comparative analysis. So let's call it QCA for short. Now, QCA allowed me to treat individual countries as a case. So the country context is not blended together. And the QCA also allowed me to examine the combined effects of the factors. So I used the 13 key factors in this analysis. And so this little squirrely thing shows you how I did my analysis. So I confirmed the outcome and also the condition is the factors. Then I evaluated multiple secondary data sources and chose the most appropriate ones. Then I calibrated the data and performed the analysis in the R. Now the results showed me the necessary condition and sufficient solutions to high national math performance. QCA also allowed the possibilities. There are multiple pathways to explain high national math performance. It's just like many ways to get to Dubrovnik and many ways or many recipes to cook the yummy stew. And so apart from the multiple robustness tests, I also ran another test to test if the sufficient pathways to explain national math performance existed in the low-performing countries. Now, the results showed that the sufficient pathways did not exist in the low-performing countries. And I want to emphasize that because that gives the policymakers extra value that if you want to learn from another country, you don't want to learn something existing in the high-performing countries, but also existing in the low-performing countries, right? So let me show you the key findings of my research. So number one, high human development is a necessary condition. So that means whenever the high national math performance is present, the high human development also exists. Now, this applies to all the high-performing countries except Vietnam. So it's actually really interesting to invest Vietnam in depth. Number two, there are 5 sufficient pathways that explain high national math performance. Now, these 5 sufficient pathways means that whenever these sufficient pathways exist, the high national math performance exists. And that's what the recipe we're trying to find out. Yeah. And it applies to 17 countries. As you can see from this simplified table, that these sufficient pathways are the combinations of factors, and they are not individual factors by themselves. So let me give you an example. So for the pathway 1, it's a combination of 4 factors. Financial resources for education, the students' content exposure to maths, and the school socio-economic composition, and the teacher qualification. And it's the combined effect of these 4 factors. Number 3, now there are 4 countries in my analysis that I didn't find the solution for them. So these 4 countries are Ireland, New Zealand, Slovenia, and Vietnam. Now, it would be really, really interesting to know what's going on in these 4 countries, and I'm particularly interested in that. And so the last point is that these pathways only exist in high-performing countries, and I explained that before already, right? They don't exist in low-performing countries. So let me take another fold of the result, looking at the individual factors. So among 13 factors, there are 3 features. So the first feature is 2 factors are extremely important, and they apply to almost all high-performing countries. So the first one is a high human development. And as you possibly could recall that it is the necessary condition for the high-performing countries, right? And the number 2 is the sufficient financial resources for education. Oops. So as you can see from these 5 pathways, the financial resources for education exist in 4 out of 5 pathways. And that applies to almost all the high-performing countries. So the second feature is there are some factors are trivial. So that means these factors don't seem to be relevant in explaining national math performance. So these 3 factors are the math self-efficacy, the learning time in school, and the percentage of private schooling. Now, I'm aware in the literature that these 3 factors are actually found that significant to explain the students' math performance. However, in this analysis, when we look at the national level, they don't seem to be relevant. And the third feature is that there are 6 factors. They show divergent patterns depending on the country context. So if we look at these 6 factors, they are related to students, they're related to the teachers and the schools. Okay, let me give you an example. So if we look at the pathway and the pathway 1 and 2, this average school is representing the school SES composition. I used the percentage of students attending socioeconomically average school as the index. So in the pathway 1 and 2, it shows high percentage of the students attending socioeconomically average school, working together with other factors, explaining the high-performing countries in Korea, Singapore, Denmark, Poland, Finland, and etc. Okay. However, if we look at the pathway 3, the low percentage of students attending socioeconomically average school is coexisting with other factors in some other countries. And they are Japan, Macau, Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. So that gives us actually that they could play out differently depending on the country context. So looking at these pathways, I want to emphasize these factors, they don't play out by themselves. What matters? The combined effects matters. So to finish off, I briefly mentioned about the implications of other countries, and I would like to emphasize these 3 takeaway home messages. The first one, the combinations of factors matter, not the individual factors by themselves. Now, I know it is understandable for policymakers to, when we're trying to get our head around, improve our national performance, and it is easier to look at one aspect of the education system in another country. But I think we have to ask ourselves, if we're only looking at one aspect, does that really improve our education quality? So the second point is the country context matters. And the factors play out different in countries, right? So we have to be very consciously choosing which country to compare, which country to learn. And the number 3 is that I still believe that these in-depth case studies are needed for these high-performing countries, also for the countries that are not explained in my studies, and especially to find the causality, possibly, that using the process and tracing. And I'm really, really interested in this area and seeking collaboration. And if you want to know the reference that I mentioned in the presentation, here's a reference. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for taking us all to Dubrovnik. So we are sure we're all here and nice and grounded if we didn't feel like here already. So for the last paper, we'll have Heli Kaupinen, who will present something on PISA's motivation and student effort. Those of us that work with PISA look forward to hearing about this a lot, because we don't always think the students are as motivated perhaps as we are, but let's find out.
Thanks. So hi everyone, my name is Heli Kauppinen and I work as a project researcher at the Finnish Institute for Educational Research. And today's presentation on students' effort and test motivation in PISA from 2015 to 2022 in Finland is a joint work with collaboration with Arto Ahonen, who is the National Project Manager of Finland for PISA. Okay, so as we all know, PISA is a low-stakes test for students, meaning that there are no consequences if student performs poorly or decides not to participate to the test. And PISA does not require any preparation, and it's supposed to assess the student not individually, but as a part of their own group. And usually the students do not receive any feedback on their performance in PISA during or after the test, and these factors can affect the students' motivation and also undermine their motivation, but also their score in the test. And in general, the students' effort in PISA test in Finland has declined from 2015 to 2018 and again in 2022. And in our study, we expect that students' effort in test depends on their expectations about their own success, but also the perceived value of the test. So if student who has really high expectations of themselves in the test and also value this test itself high, tend to have higher effort and also tend to score better achievement at the test at the end. but these researchers has shown, for example, Chilpelberg et al., that regardless of the stakes involved, the motivation has a really big effect to the test performance. So how students' effort and test motivation is measured in PISA? There are two types of measurements. First, there are self-reported measures, and in Finland we have two types of self-reported effort measures. First, we have the effort thermometer, which is a 2-question measure at the end of the cognitive part of the test, but also we have 6 additional national items that are asked at the end of the student questionnaire. And the self-reported measures have their own disadvantages, so it's a really good thing that we also have the PISA log data on the computer-based assessment, since the student behavior in the test itself can be an indicator for the test motivation. So, for example, we know the time the students take to respond to the items, but also time of first action, number of visits, etc. And then I'll talk more about the self-reported measures. So as I mentioned, in PISA, we have this effort thermometer in which students' effort is assessed using 2 questions. First question is asking and assessing the student's actual effort in the test, asking how much effort did you invest to the test. And the second question is more hypothetical. So how much effort would you have invested if the test would affect your school marks? And in most countries, the answer to the last question is higher than to the first one, and the case is also same in Finland. So in scale 1 to 10, in 2022 study in Finland, the average for the first question was 7.7, but to the second question, it was 9.1. So there is a difference between those two. And in our study, we used a subset of PISA data, and when looking at the first question of the effort thermometer on our subset, the average for the first question was 7.8 in 2022 and 8.0 in 2018. But in addition, in Finland, we also have national items assessing the students' test motivation in PISA, and students' lowered motivation towards school has been a topic in educational policy discussion, both in Finland, but also internationally. So as we can see on the right side of the slides, where are the SOS, effort scale, Likert scale questions assessing the students' test motivation. There are questions which assess actually the students' effort in the test, but also how high value the students have. The PISA test itself has to the students. For example, there was a question, it was important for me to do well in the PISA test. And our aim in our study is to investigate how students' effort and test motivation has changed from 2015 to 2022, and how this change is related to changes in mathematics proficiency in Finland. So, as I mentioned, we did use a subset of PISA data, and subset because we wanted to look at the national items of the PISA test effort. So we excluded the students who did not have responses to these items, but regardless of this, we managed to get a balanced subset of PISA data and use these national effort items to calculate a new national effort scale score for the students. And here is a really brief summary of the analyses that were used. So I used the item response theory, and I'm not going to much in details of these analyses, but as we can see, the 3PL model, 3-parameter logistic model, estimates 3 parameters for each of these 6 national effort scale items. And as we can see, the discrimination, which tells us how well these specific items differentiates the students with different levels of latent trait, which here is the students' test motivation. The discrimination was the highest with items that actually assess the personal importance of the PISA test to the students, which is really interesting. And when looking at the proportion of the total variance, it seems like this model fits quite well to these national items. So to repeat our research questions, first question was that how the students' effort and test motivation in Finland has changed past 3 PISA cycles, and how this change is related to the change in mathematics achievement in PISA. And as we saw earlier with the effort thermometer scores, there was some drop in that too. And when looking at the national items score, they tell us the same story. So students' effort and test motivation in PISA seems to be declining over past 3 PISA cycles. And we wanted to look further how much aligned are the results of the effort thermometer and then the national scale of the test motivation in PISA 2018 and 22, since we didn't got the results of the effort thermometer in 2015. And we saw that there was a positive correlation, but it has weakened a bit in the newest PISA cycle. And then to assess and look at how these measures, the effort thermometer, but also the national effort scale is aligned with the mathematics achievement, we use the linear regression to assess the relationship between these two things. And firstly, we looked at the national items, and we saw that the linear relationship between students' test motivation and mathematics achievement has actually decreased year after year, statistically significantly between years 2015 and 22. And issue was not the same when looking at the relationship between effort thermometer and the mathematics achievement. There was no statistically significant difference between the coefficients. And overall, when comparing these models, it was interesting to see that actually effort thermometer managed to cover more of the variation of the mathematics score compared to the national item scale. So finally, to my key points. So overall, the effort and test motivation in PISA seems to be declining in Finland. And this was the case when looking at the effort thermometer, but also when calculating a new national test motivation score for the students. And when looking at the relationship between students' test motivation and effort to the mathematics achievement, when using the national items, the relationship between mathematics scores seems to be declining. But still, we have to remember that effort in PISA test has a positive relationship with mathematics achievement. So on average, the students who put more effort and have higher test motivation in PISA also score better performance in the test. So what next? The national effort scale surely brings a new perspective on students' test motivation and effort in PISA. And as we saw, that effort thermometer assess more precisely of the effort students put into the test, but the national items cover more about the personal importance of the PISA test to the students. But since these self-reported measures, even though they assess the students' own perspective about their efforts in the test, they have their own disadvantages, and it would be really beneficial to utilize also the log data and combine it with the self-reported effort scales to enhance their accuracy even further. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have 20 minutes for questions. So while the rest of you think, I think there's educational research showing that a lot of people actually need 1 minute to think about what they want to know. So while you think, I will ask a question to my colleagues here on the left. So if I understood correctly, your research found that it didn't actually decrease inequality in education to have an increased enrollment in in preschool education. And I mean, one thing we often see in education is that policies that benefit one group also benefits another group. So I think you also reflected a bit on that it might be the case that students from advantaged backgrounds simply also took advantage of increased enrollment, also increased enrollment rates in preschool education. But perhaps you could enlarge a little bit on that topic, whether some of your data has something to say on that, whether that was at play or if something else explained this lack of result.
Yes, exactly. So in preschool research, as far as I can tell, the assumption is that the kids from low SES backgrounds and who speak another language at home than the school, they would profit most from attending preschool. While high SES kids who speak the same language at home, they would also develop very well at home, you know, if one parent stayed at home or if they would stay with the grandparents or something like this. So we tried to have some numbers to present for today, right? But this is ongoing research, and now we're looking into more of a moderating model. So do we see that countries that increase their general enrollment rates, do we actually see an increase in the enrollment of low SES kids? So this is what we would hope for, right? While in the literature, it's very clear that if parents have a choice to send their kids to preschool or not, high SES parents are more likely to send their kids, right? So that is a problem in a way, that the group that we want to target most doesn't use the opportunity or cannot afford it or something like this. So in a way, the work that we're doing now tries to close this gap in a way that is super important to understand this, yeah. And we didn't find significant effects so far, but as I said, we're expanding the analysis a little bit, the statistical power and so on. So yeah, and we also wanted to say that this research will be published openly, of course, also because this is EU funded. And so if you're interested in receiving, for example, the paper once it's ready or so, you can send us an email and then we keep you posted.
Thank you. Yeah, a question there on the third row. Oh, you'll get it afterwards.
Jenny from Germany. I have two questions to Sarah. The one is what's the human development? Maybe I missed that. Does this index mean, or how does this defined? And the other is the pathways. Are they an either or is how did you determine those? Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the questions. So the first one is a high human development. Yeah. So I just use the human development index from what's that data source?
UNESCO.
Well, yes, I do have the document here. And the second question for the 5 pathways for each country, it's not it's either or. So it's not all of them you have to do. That would be too much, I guess. So because if you remember in that table that it says pathway 1 applies to these countries and pathway 2 applies to these countries. So that basically shows that for these countries, the research finds out is the reason why they're having high math achievement is because of the combination of these factors. Now, I don't know if you noticed that sometimes one country appears in two different pathways. Now, in this study, I cannot explain. I have 2 reasons to explain this, but I don't know which one will be the final answer. So one possibility is that there is a model ambiguity in my study. So it means one of them is true. So I don't know if that's the case. I can't test that part. The second possibility is maybe within one country, there are 2 or multiple pathways to explain high math performance. So I think a further study is needed to see if it is model ambiguity, or it is the multiple pathways in the country. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can I go? Is this on? No. Now it is. João from Portugal. Actually, I have two questions. Should I ask them both? Or? Yeah. So the first one is for the first speakers. We also been doing some research with early childhood education effects on later education on PISA. And we also compared this for mathematics. We also compared that grade 4 with using TIMSS data. And for every additional year in early childhood education, we get, for Portugal, we get about 3 years of differential at grade 4. Sorry, 2 years at grade 4, but at grade 15, it goes to 3. So inequality actually increases later in the path of the students than in the beginning. And it was kind of a funny result. But we have also a paper submitted on that. And the other thing that we found was that there is a negative interaction with the Human Development Index. It's this index from UNESCO that accounts for the percentage of GDP that is invested in basic and secondary education, life expectancy, and the percentage of secondary education coverage in the population. So it's derived from these three. And we found that for countries with higher Human Development Index, the effect of preschool is lower than for countries with lower Human Development Index. And that's pretty much what you're also seeing, using a different methodology. So that was quite interesting. Anyway, so I will mail you and we'll share the papers because I think the results are really aligned. The second question is for Sarah. I wonder if when you look at the pets, if you look at the signs of the pets, or you were just looking which variables are significant in predicting mathematics achievement. Did you for example, we also have done some research on that, on mathematics, and we found the positive effect of HDI, meaning when the HDI is higher, the mathematics performance is higher also. But when we account for HDI, then the percentage of GDP spent or invested in basic and secondary education loses significance and becomes negative. And we figure out that that's because somehow HDI and percentage of GDP invested in education are correlated. So it's a redundant measure. I was wondering if you look at the signs of the effects. Thank you.
Let's start with the question to you guys. Who wants to start with the microphone?
Yeah, we look forward to. Yeah.
It wasn't really a question.
I think one difference is that we look at only the enrollment rate, right, and not the years of enrollment. I think that is also an avenue for our paper to become more interesting if we include that also. Yeah. So if it's possible to compare kids who attended over a longer period of time and only 1 year, for example. Yeah, very interesting.
Sarah?
Thank you for the question. Now, first related to the HDI correlation with the education, financial resources for education. So I did run this correlation. So in my study, it's not correlated. Now, so I did not choose so the measure I used for the financial investment in education, I didn't use the percentage of GDP. So what I used was the cumulative expenditure per student between 6 and 15 years old. That's from the PISA data. Now, of course, there are multiple, so there are also the UNESCO data related to that. So I did check their correlation and they are very similar. And the reason why I use the PISA data because it covers more country. In terms of the percentage of GDP, I also, because I don't know if you, because I didn't explain my factors, but in the factors, I did not use how do you say, the country economic development. That's because the country economic development is highly correlated with the financial resources for education, the indexes I chose. So I only use one of that. So I hope I answer your question. No?
I was asking about the sign of the effect.
Yeah, so in
What
terms of a
about the-
size, that's actually a really interesting question. Now, so when I submit my paper, my reviewers also ask this question. In the qualitative, so in the qualitative comparative analysis, we don't look at the size. So the purpose of the QCA is to try to identify the pathways. Now, interestingly, that for my next stage of research, I am going to actually combine this QCA with the, for example, the hierarchical linear modeling to find the pathways plus the effect size. Yeah, so thank you for the question.
Thank you. Before taking the next question, I'll allow myself to ask one to Heli. So, I mean, this is a dangerous thing to say in this room full of PISA professionals, but how important is PISA really? And what I would like to ask you is, you know, you researched motivation and student effort on the PISA tests, and of course that's really important for us, methodological, that work on PISA. But do you think any insights can be gained into student motivation in general and student effort in school in general, which is an important topic from the work you have been done? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, thank for the question. It was a really big question, but of course, this is really important topic since the lack of motivation challenges the whole validity of the PISA test, since if students do not really took the test seriously, what can we say from the results? It's a really, really great issue. But as I said in the presentation, the issue does not consider only PISA test, but school overall in Finland, but also in international scale. And I actually did read a really excellent editorial in Finnish Educational Journal about this, that in schools we should really think how can we support students to handle their emotions and their motivation in their school paths. So it should be a goal in education itself, that the motivation during the school work, since learning is not always easy, sometimes is it hard. So what happens when things get hard? You get nervous, you get anxious, and what happens next? So we have to think what kind of tools we can give to students to handle their emotions and keep up their motivation even when they need to push for it and make the harder efforts. And if the motivation seems to be declining in everyday schoolwork, in the situations where the stakes are actually higher in everyday schoolwork, where it affects actually their school grades. So if the stakes are high and still the students' motivation is low, what can we expect in this situation where the stakes are low? So this is really huge issue, and we should as in the schoolwork, we should really think about how to support students to make their motivation in everyday school life better. Thanks.
Miyako, any questions online? No? Any questions from the room? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the motivation issue because I thought, okay, it's declining, but it's still 7.7 or so, right? So how really dismotivated are these students actually? They're just not as motivated as they are for high-stake tests. But I was wondering about this difference, if you could say something about what the impact would be if it would indeed be a high-stakes test. Is there something to say about this based on your research, or is that too difficult?
Yeah, that I cannot give straight answer to that because PISA cannot be made high-stakes test, and I think we should not make the PISA test high-stakes. I think that is not the solution. And as I said earlier, we should maybe focus on how to help students to regulate their motivation in everyday schoolwork. And I think when we do that, it will also affect the motivation in this kind of test situations.
I just want to go back to Australia. I'm going to do something that you've asked us not to, which is look to isolate one of the categories. In terms of the teacher training and development, how did you find that influencing in terms of its play around the STU? Because it's some work that we're doing in Norway, actually, with a program called Step Up, which is looking at how masters programs influence teachers' work at the school level. So if you can just pull that one out and just let me know the extent to which it does give some influence around the other factors, that would be great. Thanks.
So in terms of teacher professional development or the teacher's qualification? Okay, so in my analysis, I actually didn't look at the teacher professional development. The reason why I didn't do that is because I think well, there are a few reasons. The first reason is that there is not clear data in terms of how you do the development, where you do it, and you know me. So if we only put hours in that, what does that really mean? Now, so instead, I used the teacher qualification in this measure. Now, the teacher qualification is the data from PISA data, looking at the math teachers' qualification in universities. Let me get my concrete stuff here because I cannot remember each of them. So for this factor, I looked at the math teacher with university degrees. Now, I also had a look for the other 4 data sources, which is the percentage of math teachers with OECD 5A in the school, and also the percentage of teachers with ISA, with a university degree in the school. So the first one is a percentage of math teachers. The second one is a percentage of teachers with a university degree in the school. And the third one is the percentage of the math teachers in the school. Okay, but no percentage of the university. And then number 4 is a percentage of math teachers in the school who have attended a program of a professional development with a focus on math during the previous 3 months. So I did run a little bit correlation in all of this, and the reason then I chose the one with math teachers with university qualification because that's the most robust one, looking all of them, like the correlated with most of them, and also it's also draw from my observations between different countries. For example, I noticed that for example, in Australia, that not the teachers will have the university degrees, but they don't necessarily have the math skills. Can I say that way? Well, it's recorded. And also that I think different countries like treat the math teachers qualification differently, and that plays out quite well. Now, in the analysis that the teacher qualification in the first 2 pathways, they are actually so that means the teacher qualification matters a lot together with the other factors. And I can have a chat with you afterwards to go through the factor of the pathways if you like. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Juhani?
Yeah, this is maybe a comment, Heli can answer or comment. So there are 3 different PISA rounds and 3 different domains. And the last domain was mathematics, and we know that in Finland, mathematics is not so very popular. Students understand that it's useful, but they don't like it. The attitude that for me it's quite okay that Joao can mathematics, but I don't have to understand. So I'm not sure if that has any effect on that. And it's a little bit similar thing that I have been teaching statistics at the university. There's a whole class of students who lack the motivation, but still very many people learn something.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. It was really great point to point out this And actually, when we looked at the motivation of girls and boys separately, this came to my mind. Does the area of assessment have a effect there? Because the change were the same when looking at the girls' motivation in PISA and boys, so they were both declining, but the trend was a bit different. So in boys' case, the motivation dropped when we moved from the science to literacy, reading literacy, but with girls, the motivation change in 2015 to 2018 was not that high. But when moving from reading to mathematics, the drop was huge. So, but they ended up in the same point, but different paths. So this came to my mind, could the area of assessment have a effect on that? So that is really good point to look forward. Thanks.
Can I make another comment? Sorry. It actually related with a comment that a colleague from the back, I'm sorry, I didn't know your name, made about the motivation evaluated by the thermometer item. And I think Lenny showed a very good data on the correlation between the motivation scale that you developed at UVasco and the thermometer item. I do think that there is some social desirability in answering the thermometer item. I think the students overstate, the effort that they put on the PISA test, because it's very social desirable that you say, oh no, I did a good effort. But you only find 25% of variance explained when you use your scale. So Miyako, this is for you. She was saying this morning that we could make suggestions for the next PISA rounds. I would strongly suggest to get a scale to evaluate motivation, because just one item, and that thermometer item, I don't think we can really trust what the students are saying. And by the way, the other thing is also some colleagues talk about the validity of the PISA test. We really need data to, because we are making suggestions to the teachers, to the families, to the policymakers, and we really need to have good evidence of validity. So, yeah.
I think we'll take the last question here on the front row.
Thanks. This is an add-on to the question of the order of domains. Did I understand correctly? You were comparing what was the major domain in one cycle and the next, and compared the cycles, or did you also compare or do analysis on the individual level? Like not all students in 2022 got math, but they got a combination of, and whether this differed depending on whether an individual student had first math or had a full math and then had just reading and so on. So this is.
Yeah, thank for the question. And you mean that did I look whether the booklet of the test affects to the motivation? That is really good question. And in future research, we are planning to do so. But so far, we only compare the cycles. I forgot to mention in Juhani's comment that actually in PIAC there has been signs that in case of motivation in women and men, there are differences in motivation regarding the assessment areas. So there could be something when looking at the girls and boys separately. But so far we only look at the cycles, and it will be really interesting since we now have the national items and future PISA studies to actually look at the cycles where the assessment area is the same, for example, mathematics or science. So we are looking forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for a question. And you'll fix a better motivation scale for us, Miyako, for future? Can you do that?
Yes. We are working on it, and then we have a working paper focusing on the engagement. So not only the effort, but the fatigue is a big issue in PISA. So I think 2 years of 2023, we published a working paper showing the different indicators of the engagement. One of them is the effort thermometer, and the other one is a more behavioral, whether the student answering all the story lining in the questionnaire And then the other indicator is about the first half of the test and second half of the test. What's the drop of the percentage correct? Because normally students get more tired towards the end. So we produced these different indicators and show, and then these are correlated but not completely correlated. So that, as Ellie said, that it's important to further work on it. It's something that we keep working on this indicator so that we can have a better capturing of the student engagement in general.